Next, on Currents News, Day 2 of the United States Bishops' meeting calls for unity as they debate that communion document. Plus, in a major ruling, the Supreme Court sides with a Catholic agency over same-sex foster care. Juneteenth is officially a federal holiday.
It is part of our history as a nation.
President Joe Biden signing the measure honoring when the last slaves in the U.S. learned about their freedom. And a solemn anniversary for 3 FDNY widows who lost their husbands 20 years ago today. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Christine Persichetti. Another heavy day of discussions for the United States bishops. Nearly 300 from around the country gathered together for a meeting that lasted more than 4 hours. At this time, the big question, whether or not to create a document on the Eucharist, remains undecided. Currents News' Jessica Easthope has the different opinions about the sacrament so close to every Catholic's heart.
Today, the big question was finally discussed at the United States Bishops' Spring Assembly, whether or not to draft an official document about the Eucharist.
We are all concerned that the faithful's absence from parish life may have resulted in a loss of what it means to be a Eucharistic people. We worry that many of our faithful may in fact not return to the Eucharistic celebration.
The issue took center stage and hours of conversation. It arose in the wake of recent polling that showed many Catholics don't understand and or don't believe that the consecrated bread and wine become the literal body and blood of Jesus Christ. Opinions among the bishops varied drastically. Those in favor of drafting the document said it would serve as a unifying document meant to teach about enhancing the love and centrality of the Eucharist. They underscored it's not meant to be political.
A document like this, a pastoral teaching document, would be something we would want to come together and issue.
But those not in favor of drafting a document argued the debate surrounding the issue was vague. They also worry it could potentially exclude Catholics at a time when the church is working to bring people back to Mass after the pandemic.
The bishops now want to talk about excluding people at a time when the real challenge before them is welcoming people back to the regular practice of the faith and rebuilding their communities.
The tally on whether or not to draft the document is expected shortly. Remember, this document will not ban anyone from receiving the sacrament. Ultimately, that decision will be up to an individual bishop and not the conference. If the document is developed, it will most likely take several months to be published. Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
For a deeper look into today's meeting, we're joined now by John Lavenberg, the national correspondent for The Tablet and Crux. John, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Christine. Happy to be here.
Good. Well, today was the day that the bishops have been waiting for, right? The discussion on whether to begin the process of drafting that formal statement about the Eucharist. And as Jessica just said, there will be an official tally shortly, but what happens if they do choose to begin drafting the document?
And what's going to happen is essentially the drafting process begins. The doctrinal committee will go through it. A number of different USCCB committees are going to weigh in. Different bishops will have input. And then from there, it'll come up at the November meeting where they'll vote to approve or deny. And that's where a lot of bishops said a real robust discussion should take place.
All right. Now, we have to remember that the decision on who can receive communion actually lies with an individual bishop, not a bishop's conference, right? So what essentially would this formal statement do when it eventually comes out?
Yeah, so Bishop Kevin Rhodes, who's the head of the doctrinal committee, he made clear a number of things today. He made clear that this isn't political. It's not going to name anyone individually. It's for all Catholics. He phrased it as a teaching document. And one of the things he said is in a pluralistic environment, the truth about the Eucharist can get lost. So this is something that seeks to clarify that. And they also said that it's something that at the same time that the Committee on Evangelization and Catechesis is working on Eucharistic revival. They hope this will go hand in hand with that document as well.
Now, this was a really emotional conversation for some of the bishops, and we have a comment from one that you spoke with, Brooklyn's own Auxiliary Bishop James Massa. He's a member of the Committee on Doctrine, so that means he provides expertise on all theological issues and ensures USCCB documents follow church teaching. So let's listen to that.
The Eucharist is the sacrament of unity. It's supposed to represent our bonds of unity as the body of Christ. And so that we are debating a letter, a potential letter, not yet written on the Eucharist, and it's causing disunity is something deeply sad.
Yeah, so he's calling it sad.
What he's saying is they haven't even made this document yet or drafted. This is before that process has even started. So the fact that this division takes place is kind of what he's getting at, that it's sad that that's happening. And then also something Cardinal Blaise Supich mentioned today at the meeting as well is at a time when the church is trying to get people back in the pews, there are bishops that believe that this is shunning or turning away a number of Catholics.
Right, I can see that. And there were other items on the agenda today, some more joyous conversations, right? Among other things, there was the cause of canonization for 2 servants of God, one at the request of Bishop Kevin Sweeney, a former Diocese of Brooklyn priest. So tell us about that.
Sure. So there were 2, like you said. One of them was a servant of God, Marcus LaRue, and he was a captain in the Korean War, and he actually saved a number of Korean refugees.
Wow.
The other was servant of God, Joseph Verbis, and he was an army chaplain that served in World War II.
Oh, it's wonderful. Now, tomorrow is the last day. The bishops are supposed to be talking about immigration. You'll be leading us through that again tomorrow. What can you tell us? What should we know?
So Bishop Mario D'Orsonville, who is the head of the USCCB's Migration Committee, and then Bishop Mark Seitz, who was spearheaded a meeting that took place earlier this month with Central American, Mexican, and U.S. Church officials. They're going to be talking about what came out of that meeting. And Bishop Mark Seitz, he actually told me yesterday that the goal of that is to really just raise awareness for bishops that they all have migrants in their diocese, and this is how we should be approaching them. This is how we can be there for them and help them as they continue their life in the United States.
A really important conversation, and we look forward to hear what you have to say tomorrow. John Lavenberg, national correspondent for The Tablet and Crux. Thanks for being here again.
Thank you for having me.
And just a reminder, John will be here tomorrow, too, wrapping up the virtual meeting on the agenda for Friday, the last day of discussions and the big takeaways right here on Currents News. The U.S. Supreme Court made 2 major rulings today. First, the High Court throwing out a challenge to the Affordable Care Act. Then, the justices unanimously side with a Catholic foster care agency that only adopted 2 heterosexual couples. In a long-anticipated decision,
the ACA is here to stay.
After a 7-2 vote, the Supreme Court dismissed a challenge to the Affordable Care Act, upholding health care coverage for millions of Americans for a 3rd time. The dissenting justices said in their opinion that the penalty is a tax, a reference to the law's individual coverage mandate. But Democrats applauded the decision.
The Affordable Care Act endures as a pillar of American health and economic security alongside Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
In the midst of a global pandemic, the last thing we need is to have the insurance coverage of millions of Americans struck down.
In another big ruling, the High Court sided with a Catholic foster care agency, saying the city of Philadelphia violated the First Amendment when it froze its contract with Catholic Social Services. The agency, which was receiving taxpayer funds, says it does not work with same-sex couples who want to be foster parents because of its religious objections. The issue before the court was whether Philadelphia could require foster agencies to comply with its non-discrimination law. In the majority opinion, Chief Justice John Roberts defended the agency.
Every single Supreme Court justice said that religious freedom is not a second-class right. It's front and center, the bedrock of our Constitution and our freedom in America.
Roberts wrote the Catholic Social Services only wanted to serve the children of Philadelphia in a manner consistent with its religious beliefs and not impose those beliefs on anyone else. Sharon L. Fulton, a plaintiff in the case and a Catholic foster mother herself, responded to the ruling saying, quote, "I am overjoyed that the Supreme Court recognized the important work of Catholic Social Services and has allowed me to continue fostering children most in need of a loving home. My faith is what drives me to care for foster children here in Philadelphia, and I thank God the Supreme Court believes that's a good thing, worthy of protection." The Archbishop of Philadelphia is also responding to the ruling.
It is my personal hope that today's decision makes it abundantly clear that religious ministries cannot be forced to abandon their beliefs as the price for ministering to those in need.
Catholic Social Services of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia has been serving the city for over 200 years, ensuring the city's most vulnerable children have every opportunity to find loving homes. Police are investigating after 10 people were shot, 3 fatally, in New York City Wednesday night. The first was around 10:45 when a man was shot and killed in Gravesend, Brooklyn. Less than a half hour later, another man was shot and killed in Bushwick. Then, in the Fordham section of the Bronx, 2 people were shot, a man and woman. The woman did not survive. Several other non-fatal shootings were reported in Brooklyn and Queens, including a man in Bedford-Stuyvesant, a man in East Flatbush, and a woman in Jamaica, Queens. Meantime, a Good Samaritan is recovering after being stabbed 5 times in a subway station while breaking up a fight. The man was in the 59th Street Columbus Circle station when he got in the middle of a fight between a man and a woman and was stabbed. He then got on a train and called police. He was taken to the hospital in stable condition. The man and woman were arrested a short time after that fight. It's been 2 decades since a fire ripped 3 Catholic families apart. It was June 17, 2001, Father's Day, when the massive fire at a Queens hardware store killed 3 firefighters and left their children without dads. With faith, the families carried on, the bravest in their own right. Currents News' Emily Druby is in Woodside with the somber anniversary mass.
Remembering 3 of New York's bravest. Harry Ford, Brian Fahey, and John Downing, heroes, all killed fighting a fire on June 17, 2001. Their 3 widows, families, friends, and fellow firefighters gathered at St. Sebastian's in Woodside, Queens on the 20th anniversary of their deaths to remember the 3 Catholic men lost while fighting what's now been dubbed the Father's Day fire. Lieutenant Nicholas D'Alessandro was there.
Well, it was a beautiful day, Sunday, Father's Day. We were all anxious to go home.
But that's not what happened. Instead, Lieutenant Nicholas and many other firefighters were called here to what was an Astoria hardware store where a 5-alarm fire was blazing. Harry, Brian, and John were killed in an explosion. These wreaths were laid in remembrance 2 decades later.
The fire department is one big family, all 5 boroughs, and you feel the loss sincerely in your heart, and it never goes away.
Following the wreath laying, members of the fire department filled the pews of St. Sebastian's, where John Downing was a parishioner, for a special mass. A place for both family and friends to reflect.
Brian was a cheerful, jolly guy, very knowledgeable. He was a natural-born teacher.
Lieutenant George Torres is from Rescue 4, just like Harry and Brian.
It's really heartwarming to see how many people from the parish remember, come out to remember, and Thanksgiving for the sacrifice that they made in, protecting us.
Remembering those who made the ultimate sacrifice to protect New Yorkers. In Woodside, Queens, Emily Druby, Currents News.
The widows say June 17th was such a tragedy, but although they lost their husbands, they believe they gained beautiful sisters. There's a lot more news headed your way. Juneteenth is now the newest federal holiday. Coming up, what President Biden said after signing the measure. Plus, new jobless claims numbers are out, and they aren't what experts predicted. And parts of the world are seeing a vaccine shortage. What's being done to get shots in arms? Juneteenth is now officially a federal holiday. President Joe Biden signed a bill establishing June 19th as Juneteenth National Independence Day. The signing comes 2 days before the day itself, which recognizes when slaves in Texas were finally informed of their freedom, nearly 2.5 years after President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863.
By making Juneteenth a federal holiday, all Americans can feel the power of this day and learn from our history and celebrate progress and grapple with the distance we've come, but the distance we have to travel, Jim.
Federal workers will observe Juneteenth on Friday this year because June 19th falls on a Saturday. It will become the 12th legal public holiday in the U.S. and is the first new one created since Martin Luther King Jr. Day was signed into law in 1983 by President Ronald Reagan. U.S. jobless claims are showing a surprising increase to the highest levels in a month. Initial jobless claims totaled 412,000 last week, an increase of nearly 40,000 from last week and higher than experts' estimates. Almost all of the increase came from California and Pennsylvania. This follows weeks of getting back to normal in the U.S. jobs market. This time last year, almost 1.5 million people filed new jobless claims. Looking ahead to a post-pandemic world, the Pope is stressing the needs of the most vulnerable workers. In a statement, he advocated their right to organize in unions, saying, "We are all fragile and at the same time all of great value. We hope that what is happening around us will shake us to our core. The time has come to eliminate inequalities, to cure the injustice that is undermining the health of the entire human family." From family health to the burial of loved ones who have passed, New York State could be one of the first to give a controversial option, composting the remains into soil. Here to talk about the topic from the church's point of view is the Bishop of Brooklyn, Nicholas DiMarzio. He sits down with former Tablet editor Ed Wilkinson for this week's Into the Deep. Ed.
Thank you, and we welcome Bishop DiMarzio again. Bishop, in New York State, they're considering some legislation that would allow the composting of human remains of deceased people. It's almost like a recycling of plastics and glass that we do. Obviously, the church has a problem with this.
Well, we have a problem, certainly, because our social teaching is based on the dignity of the human person, dignity of the human body, too. We believe that human remains need to be treated with the utmost dignity. It doesn't mean that the current funeral practices that may seem extreme to some, embalming, caskets, concrete vaults, that's not necessary. That's not the teaching of the church. The teaching of the church is that we must keep the remains together as best as possible. The church even allows cremation when it's necessary or preferred for some reasons. But the composting of human remains, which is this law that would allow people to use their bodies to become fertilizer, is a very, very extreme action which doesn't really reflect respect for the human body. Yeah. There are various customs around the world. We see today in India, so many people dying, and they have cremation as their way, and they're cremating bodies in the streets. They have no other way to do it, but this is their custom. And with those cremains, they're treated with respect. They're put into the river because this is what their belief is. It's not maybe the best practice either, but to say that we're going to use them as fertilizer is terrible. Why is one example? I mean, I was in Auschwitz twice, and every time I was there, there would be somebody in the group that asked, well, what did they do with all the ashes that were left over? And they said, well, the farmers came, took them, and used them as fertilizer in the field. How horrible is that? When we recognize what has happened to human remains in the Holocaust, a terrible blot on our history as a world. This is the same thing that's happening. You know, just saying the human body is nothing, people are nothing. Just recycle them. And now I give again other examples. We have even in our Catholic cemeteries green burials where people are not embalmed. They're put in a shroud, and they don't have actually their own grave, but they're put in areas where there's trees and flowers, and they do become human remains that are absorbed back into the earth. There's nothing wrong with that. But then to purposely disintegrate human remains to become fertilizer, really I think is extreme. Again, I made a point on the news that when this is a freedom, obviously nobody's forcing you. Now nobody's forcing you. But there comes the day that this becomes a custom and people can be forced. We don't have, look at what happened during the pandemic. We had all these bodies, didn't know what to do with them. Stacked up. They say, okay, you just disintegrate them.
Yeah.
So
why is it that we hold the human body in such esteem, Bishop?
Well, because we do believe in the resurrection of the dead. That's another issue on the religious side. But from the social side, from recognizing the dignity of the human person and the human remains, that's universal. That's not just what our belief is. It's what kind believes. I give another example. Today in the news we have the whole issue of Tulsa, Oklahoma, where they had that terrible massacre of black people. Now they're searching for the mass graves. Look, trying to find these people, trying to find out who they were, who were the descendants. We have archaeology, looking at all the remains of the past. We want to know our history. We don't obliterate memory of human beings who have lived. Every human person leaves a mark on this world. They have descendants. They should be respected. This is important. This is the wrong direction to go.
Okay. Bishop, thanks so much for your insights on this critical issue. Now we're going back to our news desk.
Thanks, Ed and Bishop DiMarzio. More than 50% of the adult population in the U.S. has been fully vaccinated, but the situation is different in much of the rest of the world. In many low-income nations, less than 1% of the population has received a single dose. Africa is especially vulnerable. Its people account for 18% of the world's population, but the continent has received only 2% of all vaccine doses administered globally. One major problem is that COVAX, the UN-backed project to supply vaccines to poor countries, is facing a shortage of shots. The initiative gave out only 4% of the more than 2 billion shots administered worldwide. But the situation may soon turn around as the U.S. and the rest of the G7 agreed to share at least 1 billion shots with struggling countries over the next year. Still to come on Currents News, a change centuries in the making. What's coming to this school that's home to a 1,000-year-old Catholic choir? And the race is on, how St. Mel's is working to get its students more active. St. Mel's Early Childhood Center is working to get its students more active. A $5,000 check from Fit America will pay for a new climbing structure in the school. The Flushing Academy won the grand prize out of 3,000 entries. Students took part in sports lessons as the school started a new athletic curriculum. The school's principal says getting the kids moving will help with their learning and critical thinking. Big changes are coming to a cathedral that's home to a 1,000-year-old boys' choir. The cathedral school, home to the Regensburger Domspatzen Choir in Germany, will be open to girls starting next year. The school in the southern German city of Regensburg will form its own girls' choir. The diocese explained that the step was intended to make the high-quality musical training of this institution accessible to girls in the future. The Board of Trustees decided unanimously that the cathedral choir would remain just a boys' and men's choir. That choir dates back to the year 975. Wow. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.